Hi, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. Welcome to this week's edition of Kibbitzing with Kagan, brief conversations with people I find fascinating. My very special guest today is Dr. Carey Wright, the newly confirmed superintendent of the Maryland State Department of Education, overseeing all of our schools. Dr. Wright, thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I have a million questions for you. Education is one of the most fundamental, if not the most fundamental, services that government provides. So people are going to want to learn a lot about you and your priorities. So let's dive right in. First off, you're a Maryland native. You grew up in Prince George's County. You've got Maryland roots, University of Maryland for undergrad and graduate. You also got your doctorate there. And then taught in some of our schools in DC and in Maryland. So talk about how Maryland was formative, and did it inspire you to decide to want to go into teaching and into education?
Oh, absolutely. I think my education was an incredible education in Prince George's County Public Schools. I was afforded a lot of opportunities there, and then decided that's what I wanted to do, was to go back into teaching, and started in Prince George's County and then moved on to Howard and to Montgomery. And most of my career was in Maryland. So it's been a joy, actually, to serve the state in that capacity.
I love it. So you were at MCPS, the Montgomery County Public Schools, from 2003 to 2009. The demographics have shifted since then, and certainly Howard and Prince George's, Montgomery, we all have different priorities and different needs. What did you learn that is helpful to you now?
Well, you've got to look at the context. I think that's the thing. You can't just automatically assume. I think a lot of people assume they know about districts, but if you're not looking really and digging into the demographics and what is changing, because the needs of the district do change. And as I remember in Montgomery County, and I know that's true today, there's a fast growing number of multilingual learner families, and that means you've got to adapt what you're doing in the classroom. So context matters, and I think you have to look at that as a leader.
We are totally going to get to that because my district is among the very most linguistically diverse in the state and in the nation. But let's talk about Mississippi,
Sure.
because that's so interesting. And you really thrived down there. You increased literacy from pre-K to grade 3. Fourth grade, you went from your ranking went from 50th to 21st, and you nearly doubled the number of students taking AP or advanced placement tests. Talk
Yeah.
about what you're proud of that you accomplished there.
Well, kind of all of the above. I mean, I think Mississippi had been at the bottom for so long. I think people had given up hope and
Mm.
even believing that the children could really accomplish what they could accomplish. And so setting very high expectations for what we expected our children to be able to achieve. And then making sure that reading was the first thing that we leaned in on, because we had so many of our children that were below grade level in reading. And through that whole initiative, it really took hold, and we trained all of our teachers and leaders and kept that training going year after year and provided coaching and things of that nature. But at the high school level, we were also seeing that, not all of our high schools were offering advanced placement classes. So we put out an advanced placement initiative and really more than double the number of children taking it, and worked with our higher ed folks to ensure that they got credit for it. So anybody that passed an AP test at 3 or higher automatically earned 3 credits for college. So it was an and situation, and we did it at the elementary and at the high school and middle school level. So great team, great legislature that supported us, great governor. Governor Reeves certainly supported the work, and so I can't complain.
That's great. Now, you implemented a policy that must have been at least a little controversial, which is that if by third grade students weren't achieving reading standards, they had to retake the year, and you held them back, or the school system
Retention.
held them back. Yeah. So how did that work? And is that something you're thinking about in Maryland?
Well, it was in statute when I got there. So the legislature had passed that in 2013, and I arrived that same year. And our focus was really on prevention and intervention rather than retention, because I said, I really wanted to get children early and catch them early if they were struggling. But that we did give them 3 different opportunities to pass that reading test before they were identified as retained. But the
Okay.
one thing that I did say to the staff, and we provided for the teachers, the last thing that children needed was just another year in 3rd grade. They needed something different in 3rd grade.
Mm.
And so we then talked about, what does that look like? What does that look like in terms of minutes of literacy? What does that look like in terms of intervention? What does that look like in terms of family engagement? So we went about doing this in a very big way. And matter of fact, this past year, Boston University just published their first research on the first cohort of children that were retained in Mississippi and followed them through to 6th grade. And actually, they found that those children were outperforming their peers in 6th grade, and particularly so for Hispanic and African American children. So it was the first study of its kind that was done at Boston. And so it has its merits. I think what I don't think a lot of people realize is that there was a law passed in Maryland many, many years ago that's still on the books that talks about retention in grades 2 through 12, primarily focusing on grades 4 and 8. So we're putting everything together in a literacy policy and getting a lot of feedback from parents and teachers and leaders across the state. And then that's going to be a board decision as to how we do that, and if we come back to the legislature and asking for any kind of changes to legislation. So that's already in your books, in our books here in Maryland.
Okay, so you've said like 4 things that provoke other questions. So first off, a student who's held back at that age is also further advanced socially and biologically. They may be taller or bigger. But did the study look at social connections? Were there problems or challenges, stigmas that the students
No,
experienced?
actually, interesting that you say that, Senator. No, the one study, the study also found that there was no significant difference in special education identification, which I thought was
Good.
very significant.
Okay.
And also that it did not impact absenteeism at all. So those are the 2 findings. There weren't any other social findings, so to speak, more of the academic, and then focusing on attendance, and then on special education identification.
Really interesting. Okay. You also have referred a couple of times now to parents.
Yeah.
What is the most important thing that a parent can do to help their child be successful in school?
Stay involved, make sure that they're aware of what's going on at school, ask those kinds of questions when they come home, making sure that there's a place for children to get their homework done and a time set aside to get homework done, time to read to them, regardless of the age, or a time for them to read. I think that as parents, sometimes we get involved in asking these yes/no questions, kind of like, how was school? Great. Did you do X? Yes. So versus that, trying to ask those kinds of questions that elicit more information about what is going on in school, and then being supportive of children when they're struggling, and letting teachers know if they're struggling at home. That's very important for teachers to know as well.
Love that. That's great. Let's pivot to something that you referenced that is very important, which was in Mississippi, there were about 3%, not quite 3% English language learners. In Maryland, and this feels low, it's about 12%. What do you expect to happen differently in Maryland because of our large number of non-native English speakers?
Well, the one thing I know that's true in Maryland that was also true in Mississippi is that we don't have enough multilingual learner teachers.
Yes.
So one of the things that we did in Mississippi that I've asked the staff to look into here, we provided a really nice set of resources to our general ed teachers in how do you deal with children in your classroom that are multilingual learners, and how do you address their needs as well? Because it would be great if every school had a multilingual learner teacher, but they simply do not. So a lot of that's going to fall back to the general ed classroom teacher. And so we prepared a lot of resources and lessons and suggestions and ideas at all grade levels as to how to address the needs of those children when they're in their classroom. So it's a tough task.
Yes.
But we also need to be looking at what other kinds of supports do our teachers need here in Maryland in order to be able to carry that off in the classroom successfully.
So I've heard so many stories in my district of the only person who can speak Spanish to the parent who's coming in who wants to talk about their child, and it's the cleaning staff who has to translate. for about health issues or performance issues or behavioral issues, which is totally inappropriate. Has there been consideration of incentives for our teachers to learn other languages? Is that something that's been explored that you've thought about, or has any other state tried that successfully?
I don't know, as I sit here, I don't know the answer to that. And I don't know if Maryland has tried that in the past either. So that's a very interesting idea about how to incentivize, adults to learn other languages. So I don't have enough information, Senator, as I sit here to give you information exactly what other states are doing, but thank you
I'd
for
love,
this.
yeah, I'd love to chat about that.
Mhm.
So again, I'm trying to think about, so the blueprint for Maryland's future, the tenure plan for our public schools. I was vice chair of the committee that helped craft it. It's enormous. Tell me, and then unfortunately, former Governor Hogan vetoed it. And so we had to delay and modify a little bit. And then it became law. What most excites you? What do you think is the strongest part? And what do you think kind of we didn't quite hit the mark? Where are the challenges?
Well, I love the idea of the more we can expand early childhood, the better, because there's just so much research out there that supports the longitudinal effects of children having high quality pre-K classrooms. So that to me is just been amazing. I love the idea of paying teachers more, because I think that teachers certainly deserve as much money as we can give them to make their profession as competitive as the next.
And legislators too.
Exactly. And I think the idea of ensuring our children are college and career ready makes perfect sense.
Yes.
To me, it doesn't start in high school. I know we're expecting that by the time the children complete 10th grade, but this is something that needs to start in pre-K. So what are
Mhm.
we doing in all of our subject areas to make sure that our children are ready to be college and career ready by the end of grade 3? And having been a practitioner as well as a state superintendent, it does cost more to educate students with disabilities,
Mhm.
multilingual learners, and children in poverty. So the
Mhm.
idea of being able to provide additional funds for that is just amazing. And I know the districts are very grateful for that. I think there's some that some of the complications I think are probably the things that I'm hearing. Not It's just like the puzzlement of how do we accomplish some of the things like the release time, the 60/40 kind of release time. I'm hearing from superintendents that may be difficult. So we
Why
formed a
don't you say what that means? 60/40 of what?
uh,
Talk about that.
releasing teachers, 40% of their day to be
Mhm.
working in collaborative teams and with each other, which is a great idea.
Mhm.
It's just how do you get the amount of manpower that's still going to be needed to cover classrooms, to cover and supervise children, et cetera. And I'm hearing it primarily more from the elementary end than I am the secondary end. But I formed a superintendent's work group. So anytime that there is like a puzzlement on their part, like how do we do X, then that's the group that comes together that says, okay, let's talk about it. Let's drill down. Do we need to massage the blueprint in some way in order to get this done? And it's just been a really great working relationship with them. It's never been it's not a, we don't want to do that. It's a, how do we do this and do
Right.
this successfully? And so that collaborative relationship with the superintendents, I think, has been very powerful.
Okay, so let's talk about that because that has not always been the case. And the relationship between the state and your superintendent at the state level, but we have 24 jurisdictions, 23 counties in Baltimore City, and we've all got local superintendents. And those relationships have been described as frayed. So how how big a trajectory, how big a challenge to engaging and sort of restarting those relationships?
Well, I've enjoyed it. And I mean, I believe that this relationship, and I had this relationship, I had 155 of them actually in Mississippi. So down to 24, you can kind of wrap,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. Oh
You
my
can kind of
gosh.
wrap your arms around 24.
No.
But I think they have been very open to developing this relationship back with the state again. And I'm just a firm believer that we're here to be in service to our districts. That has always been my philosophy, in service to our teachers, our leaders, our parents, our students. And so my job is to how to make their job easier. And so I think approaching it that way and listening to their concerns and then getting together in small groups to really talk about how we can solve some of their concerns concerns or address some of their concerns, they've been very open and very welcoming of me, and I can't complain. I think that it has to start by, reaching out and saying, I'm here to be, a partner in all of this, and to do what I can to make sure that you're successful in your job. And I think that approach, has been very, very welcomed.
How do you decide when something should be kind of a top down, this is what thou shalt do, versus
Yeah,
like
yeah,
I oppose curricular mandates in
right.
general, because I don't think we should say what Somerset or Garrett or Howard or Montgomery should be doing. I mean, we've got 24 totally different organizations, basically, and communities, and duly elected local education leaders.
Mhm.
When is it appropriate, do you think? How do you decide that?
Well, I'll use the very first example that comes to mind, and that is around the science of reading. I mean, the
Yeah.
science of reading is an evidence-based approach to teach children how to read, decades of research behind it. And so when you know that there are places that are still hanging on to balanced literacy, which has no research to support it,
I don't know
there
what that is. What is balanced
well, it's
literacy?
it's like it uses a system called a three cueing system. It's like kind of getting kids to guess what the word
Uh-huh.
says
Uh-huh.
versus teaching phonics and phonemic awareness and fluency, comprehension, vocabulary development, teaching those very specific things so that when children see a word, it's easier when it's harder when children are picking up a book that has no pictures, right? So
Mm.
there's no picture clue.
Mhm.
And when you got little ones and they see a picture of a horse and they're saying pony, well, if the word on the print is HORSE
Mhm.
and they're saying pony, that lets you know there is no sound
Mhm.
symbol correspondence to what they're saying. And so
Mhm.
that translation of that is very important because the next book they pick up that has that word, if they don't know an H and an O and an R and an S and an E, then they're lost because there is no picture clue there. So it
Yeah.
may aid in comprehension at the younger age, but it will not help them as they move from third grade on. So our board passed a resolution, getting to your question about the thou shalt, the board passed a resolution in January, the state board, that said, beginning in the 24-25 school year, all schools will implement the science of reading. So that was a thou shalt, like that was, they were making a statement that there is a way. We use this in Mississippi. I was there for 9 years. We didn't get that performance on the national assessment and lift ourselves up from 50th to 21st by not using evidence-based approaches. And so that's the kind of time that when you need to lean in and say, no, this is really something we need to be doing. There's research behind this. It's a proven strategy. So that's really kind of my bar.
Was there any pushback when the board passed that in January?
No,
Good.
actually there wasn't.
Okay. I love your statement of kids must learn to read in order to love to read, which
That's
is
exactly. Yep.
totally great.
Mhm.
So let's talk about the achievement gap. You referenced the Latino community and African American community. Obviously, those with disabilities, those living in poverty. How do we start to get our hands around that to make sure that all students can be moving forward?
Well, you've got to use the data, and I think that's where you start, and that's whether it's a state superintendent, a local superintendent, or a principal. I was a principal for a number of years, and you take a look at your data, but beyond that, and I've been known to say more than once, behind every data point is a face. And if you don't know who that face is, then you're not going to be able to know what that face needs. Like,
Mm.
it's one thing to look at data in the aggregate or even by subgroup, but there's not a one size fits all for students with disabilities, or not a one size fits all for African American children, whatever the subgroup is.
Mhm.
Um, and so you've got to really drill down to that individual child and say, what does this child need in order to be more successful? So when you're looking at your data, it's good to get the global look. In other words, how are we doing and how many kids do we have that are proficient, in both language arts and in mathematics or whatever. But then for those that are not, what's holding them back? And that's when you drill down deeper into the data to say, what is it that they know? Where is it that they're struggling? And then how do we provide those interventions in class time that's going to improve their performance? So it's really starting with the data and then drilling down and then planning an instructional program around what you find when you're looking at individual children.
That's great. Um, so COVID.
Mm.
we are still all recuperating from the after effects. And I don't mean biologically or with our own health, but students were really, some of them were really hit hard in terms of learning, social, emotional, mental health, and all that. How bad is it? And what are your priorities in sort of continued recovery?
Yeah, I think that it's going to vary. Once again, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier and put it in context because I think it varies depending on the district that you're looking at or the community that you're looking at.
Mhm.
And I think that's really where it's incumbent upon superintendents and principals, particularly, to really drill down as they're thinking about how do they allocate resources, how do they use their resources. Do they have enough people to support mental health? Mental health has been an issue nationally
Yes.
coming out of COVID and behaviorally, quite honestly, with particularly with little ones.
Mhm.
And so, how are you using your resources to ensure that children are getting access to those resources in the schools that we're providing for them? So, you've really got to look inside your own school and inside your own community and identify what resources are needed.
So just because a recent study showed that only 25% are aware of this, I must give a shout out to 988 because our young people need to be aware of it and share with their friends that that is a free mental health
Mhm.
suicide hotline available anywhere around the state, around the country at 24 hours. So anything you want to say about 988, how you're pushing that out in the schools,
Well,
making
I
sure
think
people
it's
know?
something that all the schools need to be utilizing for sure. Because I think that, I mean, all children to this day really have a cell phone. So I think this is a way to really get them access to free resources anytime they need it. And then I would also hope that we're looking at children inside schools that may be exhibiting those kinds of behaviors to then think about, do we have social workers addressing that? Do we have school counselors addressing that? Are there school psychologists that are there that are able to address those needs? So it's really, and it's having that and having the resources on hand in schools.
So I got to give a shout out. Delegate Dana Jones and I sponsored and passed a bill, enacted a law on telehealth during the school day
Mhm.
because not everyone has a parent or guardian who can pick them up from school to take them to a therapist appointment or a doctor's office. And yet they need the privacy and the connection there. And I think that's exciting. So same thing on mental health care and making sure that that we're taking care of the kids. Um, so while I'm on a bill that we passed this year, and I'll give another shout out to another talented delegate, Jared Solomon, and I passed a bill on active shooters. So let's
Mm.
talk about school safety
Mhm.
because we've done mental health and there's the physical health with too
Mhm.
many guns out there and too many terrible incidents like Uvalde, Texas, and Columbine and elsewhere. How do you think that's working? Is that a statewide mandate or are there 24 different practices before our law or in implementing that?
Yeah, well, you are going to probably end up with different practices, to be honest with you, because our districts are so different. And
Mhm.
I think that there's nothing more important than students being able to feel safe coming to school and that their parents feel safe in sending them to school. And I think that's utmost in superintendent and principals and teachers' minds. I think that unfortunately we are where we are, where, active shooter drills, are taking place. But children need to be prepared for that. It's not something that we can shield them from. But I think ensuring that you've done the best you can to secure your school during the school day, making sure that children are aware of what they should be doing if they are uncomfortable or if they're fearful. And I just think it's a way of unfortunately, I think it's a way of our life right now that we are having to just be conscious of it. I don't think it's something that we need to drill into children or whatever, but I do think children need to be aware of their environment
Mhm.
and as do teachers and leaders of schools. And I think you're seeing that happening across the state.
Yes. And yet we don't want them to be traumatic
No,
and
no,
cause them fear.
exactly.
Can you talk about school lunches? Uh, how to keep them healthier
Mhm.
and locally sourced. And I'll give a shout out to Secretary Kevin Addix, our friend, who wants to make sure that our farmers' produce and stuff can make it into our school lunch programs. Thoughts?
That would be fantastic. I mean, I'm an advocate for that as well. And that's probably one thing that children will complain about first and foremost is school lunches. But I think that we probably do a very good job of making sure that they're nutritious. I think that what I'm hearing sometimes from students that write me is like, could you make it taste better? So that's a totally different thing when you're making something taste better than making it nutritious. But I think that we've also been trying to make sure that all kids have the food that they need, whether it's before school or after school as well. And I think the summer program that we launched, that the governor has launched to make sure that kids have access to food is just tremendous. Because having worked in Mississippi for all those years with the state that's got the highest level of poverty in the nation, it was just so critical that we made sure that those summer lunches and summer foods were available.
Yes.
Sometimes that is their most nutritious meal of the day.
Mhm.
And so I think the same is true regardless of where you are. And I think we just need to stay on top of that.
Great. I'm trying to plow through a bunch of questions here. What are your thoughts about creativity? Everybody talks about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, but there's also STEAM, which adds the A for arts. Thoughts
Arts.
about that?
Oh, you have got to have well-rounded children. I mean, I think that we focus on STEM because we think of the economy and we think of what the jobs that children are going to acquire when they reach of age. But there's nothing you can't. The arts is with you for the rest of your life. I mean, whether
Great.
it's performing arts, whether it's vocal music, whether it's any kind of instrumental music. I mean, I know with my two girls who are now grown, when they reached their grade and the question wasn't, do you want to take instrumental music? The question was, which instrument do you want to learn
Love
to
it.
play? And
Yes,
so, and I've just seen what it's done in their lives. And so, they both still love music. So it's very important.
that's great. Teacher shortage. We talked about bilingual, and men. And sometimes, boys need to see role models.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely.
Thoughts on recruitment, or is that a 24
Well,
jurisdiction? Is that
that
something you're working on at
no,
the
that's
state
something that
level?
we're trying to work on at the state level for sure. We talked about the grow your own programs that a lot of districts are leaning into. I think there was money that was given out that was prior to me to districts to initiate those grow your own programs. We've also created what's called an in-district pathway. So that will allow districts to partner with community colleges and universities to create those kinds of pathways for people that want to become a teacher, may have some credits, may have none, but to create that pathway to becoming a teacher. And that's something that I don't see us coming out of anytime soon. And so we really need to be diligent about that. We
Mm,
have a large number of conditionally certified teachers. And so my thinking right now is, how do I support them? I mean, they've decided they want to become teachers, and so they're conditionally certified. But now we as a department need to lean in to better build their capacity to do that well. So it's the and part of it. It's like you've got to keep, because our educator prep programs are not producing the numbers that we need, but that's not just in Maryland, it's nationally. So we have to be thinking creatively around career changers. Are there people that are coming out saying, I thought I wanted to do this, now maybe I want to go into teaching? So we've got to be open to all
yes.
of these pathways so that we can get them in the classroom.
So when I was in third, fourth grade, I thought I'd be a teacher growing up. And then I kind of grew out of that in some way. But when I was first elected to the House, I was recruited and served as a substitute teacher, which I loved. I love being in the classroom. It's one of my favorite things to do as a senator, is be a guest lecturer,
Yep,
actually.
absolutely.
Yeah, love it. So speaking of students, then, Voice for Students. We have SMOBs, student members of the Board of Education,
Mhm.
at the state level, and in many, I don't know if it's all 24 yet or not. What is the importance? Do you have concerns, and are there advantages or disadvantages to having
Oh,
students making
I
policy?
Yeah, I think there's only advantages to having a student voice. I mean, I had a very large student advisory committee in Mississippi, and I intend to form one here. Has well over 100. We did not have um, members of the board and local student members, not all of them. Very rarely. We did have student members of the board. In fact, we added student members of the board when I was as the state superintendent of Mississippi. So having a student voice is huge. And so I think making sure, because that's where the rubber hits the road, and they're going to be very honest with you about what
Yes,
is and is not taking place in their schools.
right.
So I think it's critical that we have and listen to student voice. And so looking forward to working with our new board member who's coming on board. I
Yes.
talked with him the other day, and they're the ones that can tell you what they need the most and what is lacking and what their educational program is. So I'm all for student members.
I hope you'll ask or invite legislators to consider nominating or sharing some names when you think about that,
Well,
because
that's a
that
great
could be,
idea.
yeah, that could be, we know a lot of folks in our communities. So talk about working with the General Assembly.
Mhm.
What's your attitude? This will be your first session in January, when you'll be official as the
Yeah.
superintendent and not acting. What are your thoughts and priorities about collaboration and
It's
communication, actually?
it's critical, and that's the one thing that I really prided myself with, to be honest with you, in Mississippi, a great working relationship with the legislature and, involved in a lot of, the pre-thinking of bills and, things of that nature, to give them an idea of what could be successful, what was needed out in the field.
Yes.
I just think that it's really important that we talk about what what is it that you want to try and achieve, and how can we work together to make that happen? And so I'm open to all those conversations. Was meeting individually actually with a number of legislators to try and just to get to learn a little bit more about them and what their priorities were, and then share what the board's priorities are, because that's
Yes.
that's part of what we're about too.
Yes. So I have one more question and then we'll pivot to the fast five.
Okay.
Uh, if you had a bunch more money that you controlled, uh, pick a big number, a reasonable number, $100 million, whatever. How would you think it should be spent?
I would hire literacy and math coaches for our schools because when you've got a 47% proficiency rate in reading and a 23% proficiency rate in mathematics,
Ouch.
having an expert content coach hip to hip with teachers in a classroom, I can't think of a better way to build capacity. They're non-evaluative, they provide feedback, they can model lessons, they can help every school develop a plan to improve literacy or a plan to improve mathematics. That I would say the same thing for early childhood programmings. The coaches in early childhood coaching, job embedded coaching has a lot of research behind it, and that would be one thing that I would definitely want to see.
This occurs to me. We talked about recruitment, talk about retention. How do
Mhm.
we get people? My sister just retired after 30 something years of teaching, and bless her heart, she had a hard job with students with disabilities. How do you keep teachers who are struggling post COVID and stuff? How do you keep them in the classroom?
I think you keep them in the classroom by giving them opportunities to lead. I think teachers want to make an impact, an even greater impact probably than just in their own classroom. So if you can give them opportunities, leadership opportunities, or in this case, coaching opportunities, maybe they come in and coach for a year and then go back to the classroom. I mean, that gives them a chance to impact even more teachers around their teaching capacity. And I think that teachers are excited about the idea of being able to lead other teachers and to make an impact greater than just within their own community. So I think we've got to support them and listen to what they say they need. I think the research is very clear that teachers don't leave necessarily for something else. They leave because they're not feeling supported. And
Mm,
so we need to figure out, what does that support look like? And it's going to look different, I think, in every school, and that's okay.
mhm.
But we need to listen to what they're saying in terms of the support that they need to be successful.
Love that. All right. Well, Dr. Carey Wright, Superintendent of the Maryland State Department of Education, it is time for your fast five.
Oh,
Five
geez.
quick questions, five quick answers. First,
Okay.
question number one, what was your favorite subject in school?
Reading.
Okay. Question number two, a favorite book?
Oh my gosh, I'm an avid reader. So I can tell you anything by, I don't know, John Sanford, Tom Clancy. I'm a spy person, spy
Okay.
novelist. Yeah, exactly. I love those books. And
Fun.
historical fiction. I'm a big historical fiction person.
I am too. All right. I'm going to have to tell you one of my favorites off the grid here. Um, uh, how do you get off the grid and relax when you are not working?
I love music, so I usually turn on soft jazz and I read. That to me is my escape. Mhm.
Question number four. What did you miss while you were in Mississippi? What did you miss most about Maryland?
My family. My two daughters are here. My grandson is here. I am the only grandparent he has. And so
Oh,
it was very important to me. It was one of the reasons I decided to retire there and come back because I know how important my parents were to my children. And I
mhm.
thought, he deserves no less. And so that has been the biggest joy is being able to watch him and be with him as much as I am right now. And he starts kindergarten in the fall. So yeah, I know it's exciting, but that's what I miss the most was my family.
I
Yeah.
love that. All right, question number 5, the question I
Sure.
asked all of my guests.
Okay.
Dr. Carey Wright, Superintendent of our public schools, what is your hidden secret superpower? What is a skill or talent you have, something you're really good at that most folks can't do?
That most folks can't do. I don't know that I'd say that most folks can't do it, but I'm pretty good at lowering the temperature in a conversation. So
Nice.
I think that's something that that I think I'm pretty good at that. I don't think about it till you just asked me that, but I'm thinking it's not something I talk about, but I've been in some pretty, heated conversations, and I think I'm pretty good at trying to lower the temperature in that.
Can we get you on the presidential campaign trail? All
Uh,
right. Well, Dr. Wright, what a joy to get to know you a little better, to be able to share with people some of your background and priorities and thoughts. So looking forward to continuing to work with you. And thank you for taking time to chat today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I'll look forward to seeing you before too long. Take
Yes,
care.
thanks.